Mom didn't pick up the phone on a Tuesday morning, and I told myself it was fine. She was probably in the backyard, probably had the TV too loud, probably just missed the call. I told myself that for 3 days before I finally drove to her house, and nothing could have prepared me for what I found when I walked through the front door. She was on the kitchen floor. I don't know how long she'd been there. Her cheek was pressed against the linoleum, eyes closed, and for one horrible second I thought I was looking at something I couldn't come back from. I dropped to my knees next to her and grabbed her hand, and it was warm, she was warm, and I screamed her name so loud my throat hurt for days after. My name is Sandra Cole. I am 29 years old. And what happened to my mother over the following 3 weeks is something I'm still trying to understand even now. Before I tell you everything, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Heartwave Stories. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. My parents divorced when I was 12. My dad remarried fast, moved to Phoenix, and kind of faded out of our lives the way some fathers do. My mom raised me on her own in a small ranch house outside of Columbus, Ohio. She worked as a medical billing specialist for the same hospital system for over 20 years. She was quiet, careful with money, steady in a way I always took for granted. The kind of woman who kept her important documents in a fireproof box under her bed and never ever missed a bill. After I went to college and then moved into my own apartment about 40 minutes away, we had a rhythm. Sunday phone calls, dinner at her place every few weeks, birthdays, holidays, the occasional random Tuesday, when one of us just needed to talk. She wasn't the type to show up unannounced in my life, and I wasn't in hers. We respected each other's space. Looking back, maybe I gave it too much of it. My younger sister, Faye, was different. Faye had always been the one who stayed close. She's 4 years younger than me, and when our mom's house needed a new roof about 6 years ago and she couldn't afford the repair, it was Faye who stepped in and offered to move back home to help with expenses. I thought it was generous. I thought it was sweet. Faye's husband, a guy named Russell, who I never warmed up to but could never explain why, moved in too. And just like that, the house I grew up in became theirs more than my mom's. I noticed small things over the years. The way my mom would hesitate before answering certain questions when Faye was in the room. The way she stopped mentioning her savings account in casual conversation. Where she used to bring it up with quiet pride. Once, maybe 2 years ago, she started to say something about updating her will, and then Faye walked in and the sentence just died. My mom changed the subject so fast it gave me whiplash. I filed it away. Told myself I was being paranoid. They were family. Faye loved her. Then came that Tuesday. I called once, no answer. Called again that evening, no answer. The next morning, still nothing. I texted. The text showed delivered but no response. I called Russell's cell and it rang twice and went to voicemail, which felt deliberate in a way I couldn't articulate. I called Faye and she actually picked up, which relieved me for about 4 seconds. "Hey, she's fine," Faye said. "I think she just hasn't been feeling great. We've been really busy. I haven't checked on her much today." Something about that sat wrong with me. My mom didn't not feel great without telling me. That wasn't who she was. But Faye sounded relaxed, almost bored, and I let it go for another day. Day 3, I drove to Columbus. I used my spare key because nobody answered the door. The house was quiet in that particular way that felt wrong even before I saw her. The kind of quiet that has too much weight to it. I called out for her from the entryway. Nothing. I walked through the living room and into the kitchen, and there she was on the floor next to the counter, like she'd been trying to get a glass of water and just couldn't make it. I called 911 shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. The dispatcher kept telling me to stay calm, and I kept saying, I know, I'm trying," while I was kneeling next to my mother on the linoleum, pressing my free hand to her arm like I could hold her together by touch. The ambulance came. The paramedics worked quickly, efficiently, in that way that means things are serious but not yet hopeless. They loaded her onto a stretcher and I followed them to Riverside Methodist in my own car, running a yellow light I barely registered. At the hospital, they took her straight back. I sat in the waiting room and called Faye again. This time it rang 6 times before she picked up. They have her, I said. She's at Riverside. I found her on the kitchen floor, Faye. Why didn't you check on her? There was a pause that lasted a beat too long. Oh my God, she said. What? What happened? I don't know yet. You need to come. We're actually out of town right now, she said. We had a thing planned, a trip we left 2 days ago. Something tightened in my chest. You left 2 days ago and you didn't tell me Mom was alone. She said she was fine. She said she wanted the quiet time. I didn't say anything else. I hung up and sat there staring at the floor and tried to figure out why everything Faye was saying made perfect sense and felt completely wrong at the same time. The doctor came out about 2 hours later. She was a woman in her mid-40s, tired-eyed but careful, and she sat down across from me and folded her hands in a way that made my stomach drop before she said a word. Your mother is stable, she said, but we're concerned about some of the blood work. What do you mean? She paused carefully. There are elevated markers that suggest she may have been ingesting something over a period of time. We are running more tests, but right now we are looking at the possibility of prolonged low-dose exposure to a sedating substance. I heard the words. I understood them grammatically. But they didn't connect into meaning for a full 10 seconds. You're saying someone was drugging her? We can't say that definitively yet, but it's one of the possibilities we have to consider. I walked back to the waiting room and sat down and didn't move for a long time. Prolonged, low dose, over a period of time. Someone had to have been doing this to her consistently, over days or weeks, and whoever it was had access to her. Had access to her food, her drinks, her daily routine. Whoever it was lived with her. Faye and Russell had been out of town for 2 days. That meant the last time anyone had been in that house with my mom, giving her anything, making her tea, cooking her food, was Faye and Russell. I told myself to stop. I told myself I was catastrophizing. I told myself Faye was my sister, my family, the person who had moved back in to help our mom when she needed it. But Faye had been out of town and hadn't told me, hadn't called me, hadn't asked me to check on her. And when I'd tried to reach my mom for 3 days, Faye had told me she was probably just not feeling great, and left it at that. I stayed at the hospital that night. I slept in the chair outside her room, waking up every hour or so when the nurses went in. By early morning, she was conscious, and when I walked in and she saw my face, she started crying before I could even say anything. I didn't know what was wrong with me, she whispered. I kept feeling so tired, I thought it was just age. How long have you felt this way? She had to think about it. A few months maybe longer. Everything just felt foggy. I kept forgetting things. I thought maybe it was the beginning of something, some kind of memory thing, and I didn't want to worry you. A few months. Maybe longer. Faye arrived that afternoon with Russell. They drove off from wherever they'd been, arriving together looking worried and appropriate in the way people look when they know they're being watched. Russell hugged me, which he'd never done before. Faye went straight to her mom and took her hand and said, Mom, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And I stood at the foot of the bed watching my sister cry and tried to figure out what was ill. The doctors ran more tests. They brought in a specialist. 2 days after I found my mom on that kitchen floor, we got the confirmed report, sustained low-level exposure to a benzodiazepine compound, most likely administered orally over the course of several weeks, possibly months. It wasn't enough at any single dose to be immediately dangerous, but cumulative effects had built up until her body simply couldn't maintain normal function anymore. Someone had been sedating my mother, slowly, gradually, a little at a time, so it looked like aging, like confusion, like the ordinary diminishment that no one questions in a woman in her early 60s. The hospital reported it to the police. A detective came and asked questions, first at the hospital, then separately Faye and Russell and me. I told him everything I knew, the months of fog my mother described, the things I'd noticed over the years, the will comment that died when Faye walked in. He didn't react much, just wrote things down and told me they'd be in touch. That night, back at my mom's house, I sat in the kitchen and looked at everything in a different way. The pantry, the refrigerator, the little pill organizer on the counter she used for her blood pressure medication. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just sat there with the particular helplessness of knowing something is wrong and not knowing how to prove it. My boyfriend Chris had driven up from our apartment to be with me. He was the kind of person who dealt with stress by getting methodical, by making lists, by breaking impossible things into steps. He sat across from me at the kitchen table that night and said almost nothing for a while, and I knew he was thinking. Walk me through her day, he said eventually. What does she eat? What does she drink? What never changes? I walked him through it. Morning coffee, same brand, same amount, made in the same machine she'd had for 8 years. Her vitamins in the organizer. A glass of juice with breakfast, meals that varied. And then I mentioned the herbal tea. My mom drank chamomile tea every night before bed, had for years. She bought it in the same box from the same grocery store, kept it in the same cabinet next to the stove, made it the same way every single night. If you wanted to give someone something consistently without them ever noticing, you could do a lot worse than a drink they made from a paper pouch every night of their life. Chris looked at me across the table. Is that tea still here? I stood up and opened the cabinet. The box was there, 14 remaining pouches sealed in their individual foil wrappers, and one that was slightly different. The seal was intact, but when I looked closely, held it up to the light, the crease along one edge was not quite right, like it had been opened and resealed. We put it in a plastic bag without touching it more than we had to, and the next morning I brought it to the detective. The lab results came back 9 days later. 3 of the 14 pouches had been tampered with. The foil had been opened, a powder compound had been mixed into the dry tea leaves, and the pouches had been resealed with what the lab determined was heat from a flat iron or similar tool. The compound matched exactly what had been found in my mother's blood work. Whoever did this hadn't done it randomly or impulsively. This was methodical, this was patient, this was someone who understood that my mother drank this tea every night and had planned around that habit. Chris sat with me when I got the call from the detective. After I hung up, I couldn't speak for a minute. The tea, I finally said. He nodded. Someone planned this, I said. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't careless. Whoever did this went into that cabinet, opened those pouches, put something in them, sealed them back up, and then waited. The detective called me in the following morning. He told me what I was already beginning to understand. The tampered pouches. My mother's timeline of symptoms, which lined up precisely with when Faye and Russell had last had the house to themselves for an extended period, 2 months earlier when my mom had taken a short trip to visit an old friend and come back to find the two of them had deep cleaned the entire kitchen. They would have had uninterrupted access to everything. But there was something else. The detective told me they had obtained the financial records which the investigation had revealed were more complicated than I knew. My mother, over the past 14 months, had signed 3 documents. One updated a bank transfer authorization. One added Russell as a joint account holder on one of her savings accounts. One was a draft amendment to her will that, if finalized, would have left the house and the majority of her estate to Faye with a modest bequest to me. My mother, when shown these documents in her hospital room, did not recognize 2 of them. She remembered signing one paper related to the bank account because Faye had told her it was needed to set up automatic bill pay while they were handling the household expenses. She had no memory of the other 2. Her signature was on them. Her authorization was valid. A forensic documents examiner later testified that the signature on one of the amendments was consistent with being signed under conditions of significant cognitive impairment. The pressure was uneven, the letter form slightly inconsistent with her baseline. Not impossible to miss if you weren't looking for it. Easy to dismiss as the ordinary variation in an older woman's handwriting. When Faye and Russell were brought in for formal questioning, Russell's composure held longer than Faye's. Faye started crying almost immediately, which might have seemed like remorse if the tears weren't directed entirely at herself. At what was going to happen to her, at how unfair this was, at how she had only been trying to protect herself and she hadn't meant for it to go this far. She never once said she was sorry for what it had done to her mother. They were both arrested. The charges included elder abuse, criminal poisoning, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, a specific charge under Ohio law that carries serious felony penalties. Russell was also charged with forgery in connection with the documents. I was in the parking lot of a Panera Bread when the detective called to tell me they'd been taken into custody. I had pulled over to take the call because I was shaking too hard to drive. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time with the engine running and the heat on because it was February and it was cold and I didn't know how to feel. I wasn't relieved, I wasn't satisfied. I just felt this deep, exhausted sadness that I still haven't fully shaken. The case went through the courts over the following several months. The tampered tea pouches, the lab reports, the financial documents, the testimony of the forensic examiner, the records of what had been transferred and when. My mother testified. I testified. Even my mother's neighbor testified, a woman who had known our family for 15 years, about the changes she'd noticed in my mom over the past year. The confusion, the shuffling walk, the way she'd sometimes repeat herself in conversation when she'd never done that before. Faye's attorney argued diminished culpability, argued that Russell had been the driving force, argued mitigating circumstances. The jury wasn't persuaded. Faye received 8 years. Russell received 12. My mom was in the second row of the courtroom when the verdict was read. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying earlier, in private, the kind of crying that doesn't make a sound. She just sat very still and looked at her hands in her lap. Afterward, in the car, she said, I kept wondering if I'd done something wrong, if I'd made her feel like she needed to do this somehow. You didn't, I said. I know that, she said quietly, but I kept wondering anyway. That's the part nobody talks about, I think. The part where the victim spends time quietly asking what they did to deserve it. My mother had given Faye a home, a place to land, 6 years of stability and rent-free living. And somewhere in there, that had become entitlement, and entitlement had become resentment, and resentment had become calculation. My mom sold the house 8 months later. She didn't want to live there anymore, and I understood completely. She moved into a smaller place about 15 minutes from my apartment, a nice 2-bedroom condo with a little patio where she keeps a container garden now. She grows tomatoes in the summer. She makes her chamomile tea at night, but she buys it fresh every 2 weeks and keeps it in a new spot she chose herself. She still has fob days sometimes. The neurologist says some of the effects may be semi-permanent, given the duration of exposure. Her short-term memory isn't what it was, but she laughs more than she did actually, because she's not living under whatever weight had settled over that house without any of us fully naming it. I think about those years a lot. The years when Faye was there and I was 40 minutes away and telling myself everything was fine because I needed to believe it was fine. I had noticed things, small things, quiet things. The sentence that died when Faye walked in. The savings account that stopped coming up in conversation. The way my mom hesitated sometimes before answering a simple question. I noticed and I filed it away and I told myself I was paranoid. I'm not saying I could have stopped it. I don't know that. But I know that the thing I regret most isn't what I didn't know. It's what I let myself not know because knowing would have been harder. Trust what you notice. Not everything, not blindly. But when something in you goes quiet and still and a little cold at something someone says, when a sentence dies in a room and you feel the shape of what wasn't said, pay attention to that. It's not always paranoia. Sometimes it's just the truth arriving before you're ready for it. My mom called me last Sunday, which is our thing, our Sunday calls that have been our rhythm since I moved out. She called to tell me her tomatoes were finally coming in and to ask if I wanted to come over for dinner. I said yes, obviously. I always say yes now. Some things, once you almost lose them, you stop taking for granted. I keep coming back to that kitchen cabinet, the one with the chamomile tea. I've replayed it so many times, the way I stood there holding that box up to the light, the way my stomach dropped before I even fully understood what I was looking at. A resealed foil pouch, such a small thing, and inside it months of calculated harm done to a woman who had done nothing but try to take care of her family. That's the part that undoes me every time. My mom didn't fail anyone. She opened her home. She said yes when Faye needed a place to land. She trusted the way you trust people you've known your whole life, the way you trust your own child. And that trust was the exact thing that was used against her. I've thought a lot about what it takes to do what Faye and Russell did, not the logistics of it. I understand the logistics now better than I ever wanted to. I mean the internal decision. The moment where a person looks at their own mother and decides she's worth more as an asset than as a human being. That's not a snap judgment. That's something a person has to talk themselves into slowly, over time, by eroding their own sense of right and wrong, one quiet compromise at a time. By the end, I think Faye had convinced herself she was owed it. That's how greed works. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly replaces your conscience with a calculation. What Chris did matters too, and I don't think I've given that enough weight. He didn't panic. He didn't spiral the way I did. He sat across from me at that kitchen table on one of the worst nights of my life and just started asking careful questions. Walk me through her day. What does she eat? What never changes? That kind of clear-headedness, the ability to keep thinking when everything in you wants to shut down, that's something I've tried to hold on to. Because the truth only came out because someone was willing to look for it methodically, even when it was hard, even when finding it meant confirming the worst possible thing. And then there's my mom, waking up in a hospital bed, not knowing what had been done to her, spending months thinking her mind was just failing, quietly deciding not to worry me about it, going through that alone because she didn't want to be a burden. And then, after learning everything, the tea, the documents, the years of slow betrayal, getting up anyway, selling the house, finding a new place, growing tomatoes on her patio, calling me every Sunday. That is not a small thing, that is an enormous thing. To be broken that completely by someone you raised and loved, and to still choose to keep going, to still choose the container garden and the Sunday call and the ordinary forward motion of a life. That takes something most people don't fully understand until they need it. I think what I carry out of all of this is simpler than I expected. Do right by the people who trust you, even when no one would know if you didn't. Pay attention to what you notice, even when noticing is inconvenient. And when life breaks something in you that you didn't think could be broken, find the smallest possible next step and take it. My mom's tomatoes came in red and heavy this past August. She was so proud of them. Some things, once you almost lose them, you stop taking for granted.